Welcome back to the show, Gommar. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Felix, for having me.
Last time we talked in person in Berlin in December,
Exactly.
or was it November? I think it's like 3 months ago, right?
This December, just December, I think it was. Yeah.
December. A lot has happened since then. We are right before the Open, the CrossFit Open, which is probably the most fun part of the year for every CrossFit owner, for every CrossFit athlete. And I mean, you're someone who's like really into science and the science side of training, and so I think in this episode we have a very nice topic, and we probably can adapt it a little bit to the CrossFit Open as well. So how can the people benefit from maybe
Absolutely.
next year? This year will probably be a little bit too short, but maybe next year. And before we jump into the topic, Gomar, for all the people who haven't listened to our last episode, maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Gommar Dulst, originally from Belgium, did my PhD in exercise physiology. So I've always been involved in how the body moves and how nutrients interact with exercise. So how to grow muscle mass and how to maybe lose muscle mass when you age, for example. So I've always been a researcher. The last 6 years I've been residing in the ETH Zurich in Switzerland. And during that period, I also founded WOD Science. Maybe it's a science communication platform that tries to bring and deliver science in a more understandable way to people, everyday people, coaches, athletes, and of course, mostly focusing on sports science.
I mean, I think when you're like a real CrossFitter, you have probably heard of WOD Science before. So I knew
That's cool.
WOD
That's
Science
cool.
before we talked for years, and it's very interesting because one of the cool things about CrossFit is that you can like measure it, you can like observe it and repeat it. That's like one of the claims, right? Measurable, observable, repeatable. And
Exactly.
that's one of the things why I think CrossFit is such a cool thing, because it's not only training for the sake of training, but training for getting better, or like a way of training where you can really like have some screws which you can dial in order to get
Exactly.
better. And that's why science is so important and so interesting. And the topic we cover today will be, I mean, it's called interference effect. That's what we talked about before. What
That's
it
how it's
basically
called in
means
literature. Yeah.
is that you like before like 10, 20, 30 years, I don't know the time frame, but the people used to believe that you cannot get better at a specific kind of training, let's say endurance training, when you like train in another way, like doing strength training. But now
Yes,
the science
exactly.
shows, and that's what you're doing, is that you can train one thing and it interferes with another thing. So you can get better by doing burpees. When you like improve your back squat, for example, just make it plain simple, right? And that's the cool thing about CrossFit, and that's what people mostly get confused with when they start with CrossFit. They think, oh, I have to lift heavy like 5 times a week in order to get stronger, or I have to do like cardio every day in order to get better at cardio.
Yeah.
But that's not the right approach, right?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is the interference effect that people since it's a long time thought and understood that there is some kind of interference of strength training, pure strength training, and endurance training, right? So there's a lot of talk about hybrid athletes nowadays, right? That they can run
It's
a
what you see on
mile.
Instagram all the time,
Yeah,
right?
hybrid athletes. I mean, it's a cool name. It makes sense. So it means that you can actually, at the same time, improve your strength capabilities as well as your endurance capabilities. And this is something that was not really known, or certainly in the scientific world, was like, okay, you have to only dial in your strength to get better at strength, and you cannot do, as exactly as you say, too much endurance training. Certainly for example, strongman events, right? And this is to a certain extent still true, but with the rise of CrossFit and now also High Rocks and other sports, you see that people can have tremendous abilities in both endurance and strength events. And to be honest, the science has not really catched up to this. Why do I say this? Most of the science on the interference effect has just done, let's say, an 8-week endurance program, and then also adding some pure strength at the same time, or 2 hours later or 4 hours later that day. You see, so it was not CrossFit. It was just cycling and back squats or leg press. That's kind of how it went. There was never And there is still at this point no real data on pure CrossFit, where you do, for example, a strength session, 5x5 back squat, immediately followed by burpees and intervals on the assault bike. We don't really know exactly what the effects are. I mean, empirically, we can see that you can increase both, but where the plateau is, where you hit the ceiling, and how far you can get this, there is, at this moment in the scientific world, not really that much known yet. I can get into some details, but that's basically it. Yeah.
And that's why you do what you do, right? Because there's such a big gap between the knowledge which is already like available for the public and for the CrossFitters and what you just talked about. And so how is your approach to that kind of data? What do you do in order to like get some new data?
Yeah, so that's obviously a good question. So what we did together with Jonathan Wagner from the University of Basel, we wanted to first know where are high level like top athletes in the CrossFit world from a physiological perspective. Meaning, if you run them through a test battery that have been done in other sports, in the lab. So no CrossFit specific tests, but rather tests that are done in the lab, where you push against resistance for a leg press, so you measure the force generated by the muscles, or you do an incremental ramp test where you bike until exhaustion, and then you measure your oxygen output and so uptake and so on. We have done that with 60 high-level athletes in the CrossFit world. So also games athletes, semi-finalists, and also, I mean, the inclusion criteria was 5%, top 5% of the open, and obviously the better, the better, of course. And what we saw, interestingly, is that you cannot immediately correlate, certainly in the men, so the females slightly better, but the men, you cannot correlate any of those parameters to their open performance. So you would think that the person with the highest oxygen uptake or the most strength, right, would for sure be higher ranked in the open than a person who has slightly lower values. But this was not the case. So that was already interesting. So that means that there's probably other factors playing. And those other factors are obviously just raw anthropometrics. So how long your femur is, how long your arm is, how long your statue is, right? Certainly in the males, this was very prevalent and predominant. The females, there were larger discrepancies between the top athletes in our cohort and the lesser athletes. So therefore, we could actually see some effects of the strength training and the endurance effect. So that's already one thing, is that in CrossFit per se, there's definitely other factors than pure physiological that play here, which we kind of already know, but now more and more data is also stating this. That doesn't mean that you cannot make it to the games as a tall athlete, for example, Jelle Hoste or other people, but it how do I say that? It suggests that it is harder for those people. Certainly open style workouts, maybe not semi-final workouts, that's something else. I think that's also where the key of this whole story lies, is that the semi-finals and also the games are maybe more tailored to different types of statues, for sure, compared to the open. So that's one thing. That's something that I've tried to contribute myself, and also aim to contribute further, is there's many more things than pure physiological points that determine your open performance quite clearly.
Do you have like the perfect size and the perfect like weight for males and females?
Yeah, I don't know it by heart, but it's all correlational, right? So you cannot causally say, okay, if you are 1.70 m, you are for sure gonna perform better, but you can, I mean, you have higher chance of performing better. So yeah, our cohort, I think it was 1.74 m for the males and I don't know exactly for the females anymore. So there, you can actually look this data up in our study. We can link it maybe in the show notes.
Sure, of course.
People can go through. It's also almost published. It's now in the final revisions. So you can actually have a very nice profile of different percentiles of athletes. So what do I mean? We measured the VO2 max, right? So how high the oxygen uptake is of a person. And this, for example, was surprisingly low in our cohort. It was only, I think, 57 or 56 for elite CrossFit athletes. I mean, that's interesting because I'm a advanced but moderate athlete. And I also have a high VO2 max of 60. I think I once measured 62 even, right? But I'm nowhere near their level. So that was, to me, already quite interesting. I would think they would all have a very high VO2 max.
Can you throw in a number for, let's say, in like a pure endurance athlete, a bike pro or something?
80 plus, always. Every Tour de France rider has, certainly the climbers have 80 plus VO2 max. All right, they weigh less, and that's the whole point. They have much less muscle mass. I think that's the key here, and that's also where the interference effect plays. That's why I explain you, is that clearly on endurance capacity, there is an interference effect in these athletes that we tested. Because to get into the games or the semifinals, you need to have a certain strength threshold. That's also something I talk a lot about with John Singleton from the program. He says, if you don't get a snatch of whatever 280 as a male nowadays, you can have the best engine in the world. You won't make it, right? So a lot of, a lot of tests in CrossFit are just weeding out those people already, maybe with a very high VO2 max. That's something to take into account here.
I mean, you already see it in the open, right? You always have this like pure strength test. Last year, it was like the 1 rep max thruster.
Yes.
When your thruster is only like 100 kilos, you can have like the best results in the other tests, and you won't make it to the next step, right?
Absolutely, and as that's in the open. At least now they threw in a 1 RM strength test. I think it's a very good idea. I think they should always do it to make it more even and honest for the people. But in some cases, there's no real strength test. There's a little bit of weight, but I hope this year they do it again, because I think it's a good idea and it's honest for the whole field.
Okay, now you found out that the overall VO2 max isn't as high as you would probably expect. Yes. What about the strength numbers you've tested?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So in the male side, what we did, we compared the strength numbers. For example, explosivity number. So how high you can jump, right? It's a measurement. It's a unidirectional measurement of fiber typing. So how high or explosive you are. And we compared that to elite weightlifters, because they did the same tests in the lab. That's why we did the whole study, right? Of course, the weightlifters will have a higher snatch, right? But do they also have a higher raw strength? And there, the results were quite clear that our elite CrossFit cohort was actually quite closely matched to elite weightlifters. So on the strength side, there were 95% of their numbers, which is quite good, I would say. But on the endurance side, we also tested, for example, their threshold power or their VO2 max compared to elite cyclists. So Tour de France winners, there's data on this in the literature. And there we saw 70 or 75% only reaching of their values, which is rather low, I would say. If you think about it, the threshold power of an elite cyclist is going to be around 350, 400 watts, right? So if you're a little bit into endurance sports, you know what that means. I mean, our threshold powers in our groups were like 320, 310 watts. I would say rather average for an everyday endurance athlete. Good. So there is for sure some interference effect from the strength volume they do, the muscle mass they build up towards their endurance parameters, pure endurance parameters.
I mean, the CrossFit training itself is strength biased. I mean, that's what the program's intent was from the beginning. That's what Greg Glassman already said, that it's a strength biased training.
Yep.
And so this data clearly shows that it's still the case, and especially in the elite athletes, that CrossFit training is still a more strength biased training compared to other training programs.
I would think so. I mean, it's one small study, but I would say that just the raw muscle mass those elite athletes put on is not from doing burpees all day, right? They do a lot of workouts, they do a lot of strength work. Although maybe interesting, just a little anecdote. You can go back to our episode with Evan Pike, and he's a physiologist, and he was a trainer at a training think tank a couple of years ago. And he told me, quite interesting, that, for example, Will Morat, elite CrossFit athlete, obviously, he lived in the same house with him, so he knows him pretty well. And he told that Will Morat, for example, put on tremendous amount of muscle And he actually didn't do a lot of pure strength training. It's not that he did like back squat blocks or deadlift blocks, right? Just by doing CrossFit, doing a lot of workouts, interval training, sprints, and so on, he also put on sufficient amount of muscle to actually get it to the highest level in the sport. So that's something that trainers maybe can also look at. If you have someone who is naturally good at strength, maybe you don't have to push him or her too much in the strength part, because of the CrossFit itself will already, or likely will already, increase their muscle mass and also strength, very likely even. Yeah, that's something. Yeah.
So the beautiful thing about what you do is that you have the scientific data on the one side, and you act like a translator in order to tell the broad majority, the public, what they can do in order to improve. And now we found out that elite athletes, they are almost as strong as elite weightlifters, but not as like fit in quote unquote as like elite cyclists.
Yeah.
How do you translate that to the public? What does it tell them?
Yeah, that's obviously, that's how it is. That's that's an observation we made. It doesn't say anything on how you should train, obviously, but it does suggest that the strength component in CrossFit is still very much there. So if you want to make it to a certain level, you need to look at the bell curve of strength, see where you have to be, and maybe aim for this average to good strength parameter. So a snatch, look at how much do the top athletes snatch. You will always have people who snatch whatever 310 on the male side, right? Maybe as a beginning, or not a beginning, but just an athlete who wants to make it to the highest level, you don't have to aim for that 310 snatch. You rather want to aim for 285 or something like that, and make sure you get those numbers in, get to the stage where you need to be, for example, semi-final, and then work on your weaknesses, or work maybe potentially on your endurance capacity. Because likely, I mean, from what I see, once you hit a certain threshold in snatch or deadlift or whatever strength part, the determining factor in your overall performance will be your endurance capacity and your movement efficiency here, right? And not maybe getting this 15-pound more of a snatch, maybe get 2 or 3 places higher on the leaderboard, but that doesn't mean you will perform overall better than someone who snatches less, but is actually have a higher endurance capacity and better recovery potential, for example. So that's something you could look at as a coach. Really dial in your training and understand your athlete from an individual point of view, obviously.
So what I found out about my own training, I call it the crossover effect. I don't know if there is a scientific term for it, but when I train, I rarely train like kipping, pull-ups or stuff like that, because my shoulder always gets beat up. But I mean, in the open, the likelihood of kipping pull-ups or butterfly pull-ups is like 100%. So you need to practice in order to compete. And so what I usually did during the year, I train a lot of strict pull-ups. I just like try to get stronger. And then like this week, I started to practice the kipping pull-up portion in order to see if I can still do it. And what was mind-blowing for me, I went to the bar, and it's like I've like practiced it all year, right? I'm very good at butterfly kipping pull-ups, although I didn't train it for 1 year.
That's interesting, for sure.
Is it something that you can see in other kinds of training as well? For example, with strength training, where I read studies about people who went to hospital because they had an accident and they had a high strength numbers before they got hospitalized, and then they didn't train for a few weeks or months, and then they came back and they almost hit their strength numbers after a few weeks again.
That's super interesting that you asked this. So that's what is called the muscle memory effect. Crossover, rather muscle memory. You remember previous exercise from before. And this has a neural component. So for example, you never learn how to ride a bike. Like 10 years no biking, you step on the bike, you will still be able to do it. So that's a predominantly 90% neural effect. And that's something that people knew already from the 70s. So they thought muscle memory is just neural. The neural pathways are developed. They're still there. They don't atrophy or they don't go away. So you still know it, right? But then around 11, 12 years ago, there was a study coming out and they called it the effect or they put their title around cellular muscle memory. So this means that the muscle itself also potentially could have some memory of previous exercise. So exactly what you say. For example, another example, just for the listeners who are into cycling, one of the best cyclists in the world, Wout van Aert, in 2019, he crashed in the Tour de France and ripped open his whole thigh. So the whole muscle was completely ripped open. He had a bad surgery, another surgery, and so on. And obviously the muscle has to regenerate and come back. And the crazy part is, 5 months after he ripped open his complete leg, they thought he couldn't bike, maybe potentially never bike again anymore. He won the cyclocross race that winter, so he was almost back to normal. So there is definitely some muscle memory. If you and I have this problem, we will never come back that quickly. So there are some studies showing that indeed there are some intramuscular mechanisms that it's related to satellite cells. We can go deeper into this or not. I will keep it superficial for this answer. Is that indeed there are some epidemiological some different, let's say, mechanistic effects of previous exercise that are remembered inside the muscle, and that's how the muscle can come back quicker after a period of inactivity, illness, or mostly detraining. So it's a neural effect, but likely, and that's also a part of my research actually at the university, it can also be something that sits inside the muscle, where the muscle itself is changed during exercise, and these changes don't go away during this period of inactivity. That's kind of how you have to look at it. So for sure. And so your neural, so with the butterfly kipping pull-ups, if you were able 1 year ago to do 3, 4, 5 reps of nice, correct kipping pull-ups, right? So your neural effects are there. And then you just stimulate your muscles to be strong enough to withhold the forces of those kipping pull-ups, which you did. There is obviously no problem for your muscles or for your whole body to do the kipping pull-ups, maybe even higher reps, once you come back 1 year later. So you always have this neural muscle memory effect.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things which confuses a lot of people when they start with CrossFit, because we have this whole variance aspect where you like vary the training all the time, and you have back squats, and then maybe for another 2 weeks you don't have back squats, and you think about from like what you used to do in your own training. Usually when you go to the gym, you have like this splits where you do back squats on Mondays and you do chest on Wednesdays, and you do like your back on Fridays whatsoever, and you do it like on a regular basis week to week, and then you at a certain point hit a plateau and you don't get better, and then you start with CrossFit, and although you don't really like do it as frequently as you did it in the past, you get stronger. And that's, I think, one of the things that a lot of people don't understand why that happens.
Yeah, I think it has to do with volume. So actually contraction volume of the muscle. So indeed you can do, so one of the major drivers of strength is volume. So literally how many times you contract the muscle at a certain threshold. It has to be, to have an effect on mostly hypertrophy, it has to be above your 30% of your 1RM. That's kind of the threshold. If you do, for example, air squats, for most people, strong people, this will be below 30% of your 1RM, right? Because the body weighs only, upper body only, let's say 50 kilos, so that's likely below. But once you go above that, and 30% is not much. Think about your own deadlift. I have a, let's say, 500-pound deadlift. 30% of that is still quite a low deadlift. It's below 100 kilos, you see? So if you were, like many people, they did gym work, global gym work, indeed, as you say, split sets. They did three sets, let's say three training frequencies per week of a certain muscle group, and then they did the other muscle group the other day, and they reached a plateau. But if you start CrossFitting and you do a lot of workouts, so those workouts, you have to think, you do a lot of repetitions where you also hit certain muscle groups. Maybe not, for example, the glutes. You can do deadlifts to hit the glutes, but obviously if you stand up your burpee 500 times in a workout, you will also obviously have a high volume on your glutes. So I think the overall volume of CrossFit is what gets people to that next level, and then indeed the crossover effect of doing multiple different exercises here is important. So yeah, it's just something that people I think underestimate is just the raw volume. If you do 5 workouts per week, strength or even intervals, I mean, you can have a lot of repetitions there, much more than your global gym work for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to know that. I mean, those 30% numbers, they don't come from like your thoughts. Maybe someone tested it someday and they have some scientific backup to support that 30% threshold. And it's very
Yep.
important that you know something like that, because I mean, for me, I can feel that I get stronger, although I don't really do like very heavy training.
Yep. Yep.
But it's just like
That's the
a
thing.
feeling, right? And then when you have like those kind of numbers and then you compare it to the training you do and you see, okay, I do thrusters on this day, I do box jumps on that day. So you see those volume numbers get bigger and bigger. And then finally you understand why you don't have to do heavy weights every week, 5 times a week in order to get better.
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, volume is the most important, because in this particular study, what they did, they measured muscle mass gains by doing a set at 30% to failure. So that means very high repetition. I think 30 reps they did, right? So they went to failure, but took 30. It was leg press, so 30%, and then they did the same training, but at 80%. And then they just did obviously less reps. And then they checked the muscle protein synthesis, so how many more proteins are synthesized in the muscle, as well as the muscle mass gains. And they saw the same. So they saw the same total muscle mass gains. So and then they also did a set not to failure with 30%. That's interesting. So they did also 30%, but they stopped, I think, at 20 reps or something, or 15 reps. And then they didn't see those effects. So if you go, and that's the whole point about CrossFit, I think. If you do a workout, which is relatively lightweight, most of the times it's around 30% of your 1RM, 50% of your 1RM, right? Like high rep snatches, high rep power cleans. It is always almost to failure. If you think about it, 4 rounds for time, the last 2 rounds, you are putting it down after 2 sets. You cannot do a 1 set unbroken anymore, because you are reaching that failure of the muscle. And that's why pure workouts, and we also have a video about this, actually I think are also very much inducing muscle mass gains. Maybe not the same as a weightlifter, but very high because of these high volumes. I think.
Do you think in the beginning a lot of people struggle with increasing muscle mass because they don't really get to that point of failure? Because I see a lot of people when they start doing CrossFit, for example, and I wouldn't say like air squats, but more complex movements like a power clean or a power snatch, they're so focused on the technique part of things that they cannot move fast, they cannot like do a set unbroken. So I mean, for an elite athlete, it's very easy to go to failure, right, in a workout.
Yeah,
for me, it's like I know exactly at the beginning of the workout, okay, what I have to do and where I have to let go of the bar, and then I feel like crap afterwards. But you see a lot of people where you think afterwards, okay, maybe you should have taken some more weight, or you should have moved a little bit faster, because look at me and look at you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, very good point. I think that's indeed something that holds people back, because you need the muscle failure. So you need to recruit all the motor units in your muscle. Otherwise, you won't have the adaptation in that case, or you will have a reduced adaptation. So indeed, that's one of the interesting parts about CrossFit. It's all about functional, complex movements, or most of it. Even a back squat, you would argue, it's actually not so easy for most people, right? Certainly to go below parallel and so on. So yes, when I coached as well, I saw this a lot. That people actually took maybe too little weight, even though they had a good form. So there's the ego busters that want to have bad form and too high weight, but there's also the other side of the spectrum that maybe people don't talk too much about, is that the good form, but actually, you could maybe add a little bit of more weight to the bar.
I mean, especially in women, right? Women tend
especially women. I agree. And here, if their goal is to improve their technique and gradually get better, I think it's a fine approach. I mean, you will get neural stimulus and you will get better in your technique work, PVC work. If the goal is to actually, improve body composition, improve muscle mass, reduce fat mass, you need to burn the calories and you need to actually do the work. So there, what you can do as a coach is, if you really are concerned about those people, is give a little bit more isolated work. Where you do with resistance bands, or for upper body, you can do very isolated work, for example, where they have to go to failure with a resistant band. I think that's always a good way. And lower body, certainly in a CrossFit gym, it's going to be difficult because you don't have the actual machines. For example, leg press would be a good option. Just put them on the leg press, safe machine, and go to failure. Even though they don't really know how it is, if you're there and you push them, they will for sure get there. That's kind of my idea. So this is something you have to be aware of as a coach, that indeed if people are going too light with good form, the adaptations to the muscle will be less than the way you go to failure or close to failure. Let's keep it like that.
I mean, that's what they call threshold training in the level 1 and the level 2 training guide in CrossFit. And that's, I think, one of the responsibilities of a good coach, to know where the threshold of an athlete is and where to push the athlete or where to hold it back when the form is not
throttle back.
Not so good, right? It's like constantly back and forth between like too light and too heavy and go faster and go slower. But the thing is, which I really find very interesting, is that you don't have to use super heavy weights that what usually women are afraid of. I don't want to use super heavy weights, but you can make similar gains with less weights when you just push it harder. And that's what I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So as I said, 30% of your 1 rep max. The problem is obviously, and that's maybe one thing we can also discuss, why does specifically CrossFit workouts also induce muscle mass gains, is, and that's also unresearched, so I cannot give you clear data, but that's more of a feeling, is if you go at 30%, 35%, and you do high repetitions, you are tapping into energy systems that build up a lot of lactic acid, not really lactic acid, that's not the right term, but at least there's a lot of fatigue building up in your muscle, and you feel a burning feeling in your muscles because your muscles and blood acidifies. So that's something we all feel after a typical workout, CrossFit workout. And that is something that is more predominant than when you would do 5x5 back squat at very heavy weights. So you have then the mechanical tension, so actually how much tension there is on the muscle is much higher with high weights, obviously. But the metabolic tension or the metabolic effects of a CrossFit workout, so 35%, are much higher than the other side. So both have specific adaptations and both lead to muscle mass growth. That's why also when you, for example, put a cuff on your arm or your katsu train, it's called, or your thigh, and you do reps at low load, you will also have higher effects of those training, mostly hypoxia and so on. So also the byproducts. So that's something, again, research is catching up, but it is clear from 15 years of CrossFit that people who do 5 workouts per day for multiple years also build muscle, even though they don't do super heavy strength training. And that's something, we are learning. And these metabolic effects of CrossFit and the lactic acid buildup and also the H+ protons and so on, that's something that's, I think, very interesting and needs more research for sure.
One of the questions I get all the time is, do I need to feel like I have worked out, which means do I need to feel like muscle soreness or lactic acid in order to make gains, or can I have a very good training without like really reaching that point? Because I mean, for me, to be very honest, I love to have muscle soreness because I just like the feeling, but sometimes it's just too much. I mean, I worked out 2 days ago and I still can't really walk well because my legs are super sore. And that's like a kind of feeling which is maybe too much, but I didn't really work out in January at all. And my muscles felt really slobby and that wasn't a good feeling either. So how would you approach this question?
Yeah, so muscle soreness is more, let's say, a parameter of how long you have not been training and then come back to the training. Exactly what you say, I think. That's an important point. So it comes up when muscles are not really adapted to the stimulus they are provided. So if you do a super hard workout as a novice athlete, you will be sore. And that doesn't mean you have higher adaptations. Why do I say this? Because if you train for a long time, you the listeners and yourself probably have done it yourself for multiple months, you barely are getting sore anymore. I think we can all agree, even when you do hard CrossFit workouts, sometimes a little bit when you do like a super hard workout. But if you just have a nice structured training plan, you are training 3 to 4 times a week. After a couple of weeks, you won't get super sore from a couple of lunges. But you still have the adaptation of that training. So it's not a direct, so DOMS or delayed muscle soreness, onset of muscle soreness, is not a direct parameter of how well you trained. It's just how unaccustomed the muscle was to that training and how high the training load was at that point, how much the muscle damage was as well to that point. So that's a typical concern is I would be not too concerned to always be sore after training to have the right adaptations. It's rather maybe even the opposite. If you have been training well, you have done your structured plan, and then again a good training, then you won't be sore, but still have the adaptation. I think that's how you have to look at. For example, I've been going the last 2 months more to a global gym for pure strength training, so pure muscle pumping, like 3 times 4 times 10, right? And I almost never get sore of this training because I've been doing sports for forever. And even when I push it almost to failure, back squat and on, I almost never get sore. Then I do once or twice a week a CrossFit workout and I get sore. It's super interesting. And I've been contemplating like, how the hell? And that's because of the volume, I think. It's just many more repetitions, more eccentric contractions, and that's basically determining of how you adapt to the training. So the body is a very interesting machine, and we have to learn a lot about this.
Yeah, so when I talk to people who just started with CrossFit, and what they usually tell me after 1 or 2 workouts, they're very sore. I mean, that's what you just described, right? They're not used to this kind of volume. Yeah. And they talk to me and they say, you probably never get sore. You're working out for like 10 or 15 years. Do you even get sore? And I tell them, trust me, I can get very, very sore. Yeah. Although I work out 5 times a week, because I mean, I can handle much more volume than you can handle, right? So I think that's very, it's a very hard misconception that only your training years or your training experience tells how much soreness you can experience, right? Yeah.
I rather think it is the training frequency. For example, my wife, when she started CrossFitting, in the beginning she was like a bit timid. She said, "I'm going to go once a week," and she was always super sore. But then when she went 6 months later, started going 2 to 3 times a week, just pure CrossFit, high repetitions and so on, she almost never got sore anymore. So it is really how long your recovery is and how long your detraining kind of is, and then how strong the stimulus is of that new training that will determine a large part of your DOMS or delayed onset of muscle soreness.
Yeah, and even after years, you can still experience this very nice feeling of not being able to walk for days when you do a lot of wall balls and a lot of snatches, and you haven't done that for like weeks or months. So that's the cool thing about CrossFit. It also punishes the people who do it for a very long time, not only the beginners, and I think that's the beauty of the sport.
I agree entirely. Yeah, I agree entirely.
Yeah. Gommar, let's talk a little bit about the program which you are going to launch. When we go back to this interference effect, you have something which you want to share with the community.
Yeah, I want to share. I mean, it's not out, but we can have a little prequel here on the podcast. So the interference effect. So what is that? As I said, it is when strength interferes with your endurance training or vice versa. And that's exactly what CrossFit is. There is always some form of interference. And as an athlete, you want to avoid that as much as possible. You want to get better at strength and in endurance at the same time. And one of the things research has beautifully shown is that you can decrease your interference effect by separating those sessions. For example, exactly not what CrossFit does. That's quite interesting. It doesn't mean it's better, but that's just what the science says. You do strength training in the morning, you rest six hours, that's kind of the threshold, and then you do endurance training in the evening or in the afternoon. That's because the metabolic and enzymatic pathways in the muscle are actually interfering of strength and endurance. So what we want to do with the page as well is we want to set up a large study where you can participate. Literally everyone can participate. It's going to be an 8-week training program, and there will be 2 separate groups. One group will receive 8 weeks of normal CrossFit training, where you do typical back squats, deadlifts in the beginning of the session, and then a typical workout of the day in the later parts of the session. So nothing changes there. Throughout those 8 weeks, with a little bit of periodization, so you don't get overtrained and so on. That's kind of neutral. But the second block will get those sessions, exactly the same session, so there won't be a difference in total volume, but they will get this completely separated from week 1 to week 2. So this means that the first week they will do strength training, pure strength training, only different sets and so on. And then the next week they will do the endurance part. They will do interval sessions, and they will also do the workouts of the day without any additional strength training on beforehand. And then before and after, we are gonna do a test battery. I can already tell you, CrossFit total, so pure strength, a 2K row, Fran, and a max set of back squat at 35% of your 1RM, so max reps, before and after. And then we want to see who improved the most. It has never been done, and the goal is to have a lot of people, so not 10, but literally like 500 to 1,000 people doing this. So we have a very nice cohort of people. It will cost you $10 to participate, so very, very cheap. And then we can see which training plan can actually work, and maybe have a little bit of a paradigm shift into programming, because, for example, I talked with John Singleton from the program, and he doesn't do this, even with his elite athletes. He just says, no, CrossFit is combined, so we always do combined training, typical how it is programmed in local affiliate. Interesting, it clearly works for him, but we want to see if there's also other approaches and if they could actually be more beneficial. Let's see.
So you will have the exact same workouts in both groups?
Yeah, exact same volume, exact same, everything exact the same, only we will separate it a week and do so separate it entirely.
What I'm really curious about is the workout times and the workout numbers when you compare those groups with each other, because when I did a workout on Monday, for example, where I did heavy back squats, and then I did some wall balls and some dumbbell snatches, and my legs were super tired after the back squats. So I think I could have hit the workout harder when I wouldn't have done the back squats before. So I'm really curious about what this study shows, if it's really the case, or maybe if it's beneficial when you do the heavy part before. But because what usually the case is, and that's why the CrossFit.com programming, why they usually only have a workout or a heavy day, is because they say, when you focus on the workout, you can give 100% in the workout, but when you do a strength part before, you will be you have to decide where to put your effort in, right? You cannot do 100% effort in both. And that's exactly what the study will show, if it's possible.
Exactly. So that is a very interesting question. So it is no doubt that you will decrease your performance and the work output in your workout after a heavy back squat session. There's no doubt. I mean, there's many studies have shown this. If you rest 5 to 10 minutes, how it is mostly in CrossFit gyms, quick warm up, you will have a lower output. But this doesn't necessarily mean that you also will have less adaptation of that training. I don't know. I really don't know. Likely, you would think maybe, but if your muscles are already more tired and then you just do another workout on top of them, maybe it's even beneficial, as you say. I don't know. It clearly works in CrossFit, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the optimal way. So that's how I see it. For example, Adrian Mundweiler, I know, I don't know him very well, but I heard that he did kind of this training where he did a workout was just 60 ring muscle ups. So obviously he had to put it in sets, but he didn't do any movements in between those ring muscle ups. He just did 60 ring muscle ups, for example. That's how he approached the game, and obviously he's also very successful. So, but then I also know Jeffrey Adler. I mean, again, I don't know him, but I heard that also he's just doing CrossFit. He doesn't really program strength blocks and so on, where he does a progressive overload of strength and so on, and he's the best in the world. So, yeah. Much to learn. I don't know what the best option is. It's something individual, but that's something we can look at, and also using our platform to reach a lot of people that can actually sign up, do the pre-test and the post-test, do the workouts. It's only fun, and maybe you learn something from it as well.
And I think it's that where you have to distinguish between the adaptation from a specific workout and the results from a specific workout, right? Because when you go into a workout and you did a heavy strength part before and you want to PR, then the chances are that you're not going to PR in that workout, but you can get a good adaptation from that workout. And when you retest this workout later on, you can still get a PR in this workout.
Exactly what I mean. Exactly. That's usually also for me, for example, I always felt a lot more powerful during open workouts because I was just doing the open workouts, obviously. And I am naturally quite strong. I fatigue also very quickly also during workouts. So I'm an explosive type. So if I did back squat, exactly what you say, before a workout, man, I was 10% decrease, 15% decrease in my performance at least during a workout because of those back squats. Some people have this much less. They do back squats, they walk to the workout and they just go for it. I always had to rest, drink a bit of water. I was always that. But it really depends on the person. And maybe the person who is not super fatigued from the heavy strength will be, in the long term, a better CrossFitter. That's also something to think about, which I think actually.
And I mean, that's the difference between training and competing, right?
Yeah.
So training is one thing and competing is the other thing. And the cool thing about the CrossFit Open, it's like a competing scenario where you really want to focus on one workout and you do all the things that you can do in order to improve or perform in that workout. And the thing that you do all year before is the training part. And there you can try something out. Maybe this works for you. Maybe that works for you. And you will see the results in this competition scenario, but you would probably not do like a heavy set of 5 back squats before you do an open workout when you want to give your best. I mean, that probably makes sense.
No, except if you're an elite athlete, they do some strength work before an open workout and still crush.
I mean, for them, the open is not the thing.
Nothing,
that's
obviously.
right. They just do it on the side, and they that's the thing.
They definitely won't do this in the corners.
No,
that's
especially not at the games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's super interesting for sure. The interference effect. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, Gommar, we talked about so many interesting things today, and I think there's so much room for much more details in every aspect of our conversation, and I hope we can do this on a regular basis, because I think a lot of people, they really want to understand the science behind CrossFit and the things you're doing with WOD science. That's exactly what the people need. I mean, they need someone like you who has the studies and who reads through all the papers and then tries to translate it in easy words and easy language so the average CrossFitter can understand and can use it for his own training. And I think it's very, very cool that you have your own big study group where you can participate and test it out yourself. And we will link it in the show notes, and I will post it on my Instagram as well. So everyone who wants to participate can do that. And I'm really looking forward. And we should schedule a discussion after you've done that experiment in order to see and evaluate what really happened there.
It will start a week after the open, obviously, so we'll have some time also to maybe get it out there, so more than 3 weeks. We are planning to start this, and it will last 2 months, 2 times 4 weeks.
Cool. Gommar, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate it, and talk to you soon.